we'll leave a couple of minutes for Q&A. So start getting those questions in there. And just so you know, this is being recorded, and it is also being live streamed onto YouTube as we speak. So let's get into it. I want to welcome our panelists. First of all, we have Garma Criesta, who's the COVID tracker product manager for the Irish Health Service Executive, the HSE. We have Colm Hart, who's the technical director at NearForm. And we have Kevin Devine, who's a senior product designer here at NearForm. And the three of them were all part of the team that was behind the COVID Tracker Ireland app launch. And, you know, this, as many of you know, was the most successful launch of a contact tracing and exposure notification app worldwide, and is now forming the basis for a lot of those apps that are rolling out, as I said, in many countries and in many US states. So basically, the way today's going to work, I'm going to, you know, throw out some questions. It's going to be very conversational. This isn't a formalized thing. There's no slides, you know, there's no decks. This is really just to give people a nice sort of relaxed view of how all of this came together and what it's all about. So just to get the ball rolling and give people the sort of latest context. Gar, do you have any of those sort of latest stats on the app and how it's performing and what it's been doing?
Yeah, so as of, well, I guess yesterday, so for anybody watching this live who's based in Ireland, download the new version of the app, which went into the App Store and Play Store last night. I think that's the first call out. As of now, so we're about 1.2 million people who are using the app. We are, since go live, we've had about 800 close contact notifications. So that's 800 people who've received a close contact event. And about, I think it's somewhere between 350 and 400 people have uploaded the random IDs from their device, and that's kind of how this whole thing gets seeded. So we've had, so that basically means we've had about 350 to 400 people who are app users who have tested positive, and then we've notified people as a result of contacts they've had with other people. So I guess the good news, and Paul Reed mentioned it in a press conference the other day, well, it's not good news, but in terms of the efficacy of the app, it's good news, is that the app has picked up people who've gone on to test positive for COVID-19. And that's, so we're in a situation now where we're beginning to measure. So we're into a 3-month evaluation at the end of, well, actually probably into October, where we'll be looking at the efficacy of how this works and how it's augmenting contact tracing and testing in Ireland. So that's going to be an ongoing piece of work. And I think that's been the biggest variable for a lot of people, is when we started this back in March, it was blind faith. It was, let's figure out a way that can work. When it's actually operational now and it's integrated in there and we're gathering data, it's saying, now does it work? And how is it actually helping? How is it augmenting what we're doing at the moment? So that's kind of the quick summary to date.
That's fantastic. I mean, I think it's wonderful for everybody, not just us in Ireland, but everyone worldwide working on these things, to be able to get a sense of, you know, what's possible with the apps and what they can do. One thing that really jumped out at me and jumped out at a lot of people, particularly with the Irish app, but I'm sure it applies to a lot of public health authorities, as they call them in the US, was the number of people, organizations, teams, you know, businesses, companies, all involved in getting an app out in an incredibly short period of time. Can you give people like some sense of like, you know, those types of organizations and what you were dealing with as you were trying to pull all of this together?
So I was only talking to somebody earlier on about this. So this started back 17th of March officially, Paddy's Day. Obviously for you guys, you started on Mother's Day. But so 17th of March it kicked off. I got involved in the 18th of March. At that point, it was the HSE and Department of Health, obviously from a COVID-19 response. Department of Public Expenditure was supporting, and Garda Síochána were involved and supporting as well, and the Defence Forces. So you had those, and then throughout the way, we've had Central Statistics Office have been incredibly helpful. Ordnance Survey Ireland have been incredibly helpful. So Ordnance Survey hosts GeoHive, which is the data hub. So a lot of the data that we're capturing ends up in there. So we've been working with lots of different agencies and departments. And separately to that, at the very beginning, an expert group was convened. So there was Niall O'Donoghue who kind of pulled this expert group together to try and help us answer some of the questions that we had. So we basically had 100 people that we could just throw questions to. I didn't know who half of them were, but we could throw them questions and they'd come back. It was like find out how many people in Ireland have a phone with these capabilities, and you get an answer in a couple of days, right? So it was that kind of stuff that was, and it was ad hoc. And we had guys who were in the usual self-deprecating Irish way. Do you know anything about Bluetooth? Oh yeah, I know a little bit about radios and stuff. And you find out that this guy's designing kind of plane-to-plane communication systems and stuff like that. So we had this really unique opportunity to bring that group together. And I guess on the other side of this, so you guys got involved on Sunday in March, the 22nd or 23rd, something like that. So NearForm, Explio were involved in the testing. We had ISAS and EdgeScan on security and data protection. And then Science Foundation Ireland they had a group that was supporting research around COVID-19 to support any of the responses overall. So we had working groups looking at ethics, privacy, UX. It was like proximity detection and sensing. So we had like 6 or 7 different research groups. The Economic and Social Research Institute, ESRI, we had Pete Lunn and Hannah were working on behavioral studies to try and help us understand like what the call to action is for the app. So we had this massive virtual team, most of who I met everybody. So I knew everybody. Amazon were involved as well from the very beginning, and they were incredibly helpful in terms of bringing some of this together, Twilio and others. So like there was this enormous group of people who were all, I was kind of in the middle of it, in that I knew everybody, but not everybody knew who else was involved. So it was like,
yes.
So it was this incredible network that just developed. I think I was saying to somebody earlier on, it's definitely the best team I've ever worked with overall, because there was it wasn't like anybody was managing anybody. It was everybody knew their job and just did it. And everybody was very comfortable with the fact that we didn't know what we didn't know, and all we could do was learn as quickly as we could. So when we were in the maelstrom and trying to work through it, and I'm looking at 2 of them there. So Kevin and Colin, who had to decipher from my cryptic scratchings what it was we were actually trying to do at the very beginning back in March. So that's kind of that. And so it was a very, very large, very extensive team, but it was all virtual and bit players, cameo roles, people coming in from all over the place. So
okay, yeah. And Colin, like when you got that call, like what to give just people some sort of sense, like what happens when you get a call like that? Like you hang up the phone, and like what happens in NearForm land when this sort of thing comes?
Yeah, so I mean the call was quite interesting. It was like, look, we want you to help. How fast can you create us an app? The target that Gar originally set for us was, could we have a working prototype that running on devices by the end of a week? So 5 days. So that was a Sunday. Monday morning, we put a team together to kind of kick off everything. I went through kind of the ask. Kevin had actually worked overnight, Sunday into Monday, had come up with an initial set of designs. So we had an idea what the app needed to do in terms of flow and functionality. Put a dev team together very quickly, and then sat with the dev team, went through it, and was like, okay, the ask is, can we do this by Friday? And in fairness to the dev team, they said, absolutely, we think we'd actually get it done by Wednesday. So, and they did. By the Wednesday, they had a working prototype on phones with most of the end-to-end flow in place. So, that was pretty incredible to see a team get together and actually deliver that quickly.
That's not InVision prototypes. That
was actually working software deployed on a phone, working and doing things.
Doing things, yes.
Doing what it's supposed to do.
As an observation on this as well, like one of the interesting things about it was, and if you remember back to March, we all felt pretty powerless because the pandemic was coming, you couldn't do anything. So I think anybody who got involved in this, it gave you a purpose. So the purpose came for free. So people just jumped in. You didn't have to ask people to work on this. People were kind of crazy to work on it, trying to figure out how they could help. So that's been a consistent theme all the way through, that there's just been people standing up and saying, how can we help? What can we do? And just random people from anywhere just helping us, which has been amazing, and including the guys in the team as well. So it's been very, I think, because the purpose is crystal clear what we're trying to do, and we were trying to solve a very well. It's the problem definition is quite simple. How do you find people who are too close for too long? That's it. Where one of them has been infected. That is the core requirement in this. The rest of it we can figure out, but that's the core bit that we're trying to solve. So it was very clear what we're trying to do.
And I think from everything we've seen to date, this idea of people trying to help, we're seeing this worldwide, that no matter what country or state is trying to do something, there are groups of people just putting themselves out there saying, I want to help. Is there any way I can actually help? And it is a pandemic. It's a terrible thing we're in, but it also is showing the, the good side of humanity. I think we're actually seeing some lovely things there. Now, one thing I've noticed, not just with the apps we're building, but lots of the other ones that are out there is, but even specifically the ones done by NearForm, they all look very different. And Kevin, like when, what are the things, and even if we talk about that first weekend, like what do you go through? Like what's the sort of mini process you go through to go, right, how do I execute on this? How does a product designer actually start with a phone call like that, and then by Monday have screens and
yeah. So it was a Sunday, I think the 22nd or 3rd, that there was just a message on Slack from Colin, and like Gareth said, like you did feel powerless about the whole thing up to that point, and there was just a message, we might be working on something for the HSE. Is anyone around to help out? And yeah, it was suddenly like, wow, sounded something really cool to get involved in. So I jumped on a call with Colin, and I guess the first thing we looked at, okay, what's the timeline? And Colin said tomorrow morning, if possible. So myself and Jeff, we worked on, we kind of just made quick decisions, because I think the first week was to prove capability for NearForm. So we weren't looking at the kind of 6-week timeline. We were looking at what can we get for the developers to start on tomorrow. So we worked on core flows. With all these apps, there's an element of onboarding that's really important. And we hadn't nailed every permission at that point and what was required, but we had a good idea of what we needed to ask for. A sense of a landing screen, a sense of the contact tracing. So I think the first task was timeline. Okay, so we need something by tomorrow. So we worked smart. We kind of came up with some common patterns, didn't overthink it, had to make good decisions at that point. Then we kind of looked at the audience, and it was kind of everyone and everyone, 16-year-olds to 80-year-olds would be potentially using this app. So that kind of dictated design decisions about, everything was clear, plain English, making it tappable, the height of buttons, not overthinking any of that, and just using common practices. And then we looked for any branding that existed. So I didn't have much to go on. I hopped on hse.ie. There was the yellow kind of pattern that was being used with the diagonal cuts. So I took that and went with it and brought in the HSE brand colors. And there was a symptom checker that was being used on the HSE website at that time. So I just took some copy from that as well. And that kind of helped inform. I think we kind of had 20 screens or so by the Monday morning, with a hungry development team. So like every day then there were changes, but I think we had a good envisioned prototype by the Monday morning, which the dev team were able to take. We got it into Zeppelin for them to work with, and it kind of went from there. And once we proved we could deliver, then it was, okay, what's the next deadline? And it was this date that kept moving. But I think if we knew now, we might have approached it a little different at the start, but we were just working it could be released, in 2 weeks, it could be released in 4, it could be 6. So it was always a moving target. So we kind of adapted the team to that.
But I'm sensing or seeing a theme here that, and I know anybody who listens to me prattle on knows I've been using this phrase over and over, but I constantly refer to what Dr. Mike Ryan from the WHO talked about all of this, that perfection is the enemy of the good when it comes to emergency management. And actually it almost feels like the short timescales, these incredible time pressures, in some way sort of assisted, because you just had to make decisions. There was no opportunity to dither or bike shed or any of that sort of stuff. Is that a fair comment?
Oh, definitely. And so even if I go back to the first week when we started, and myself and Colin and Kevin have talked about it a good bit. So we built this app 3 times in 3 months. So the first iteration of it was GPS based. So it was using GPS and using time and then big data play to figure out were people in geo-time boxes, right? And obviously that lasted a couple of days, and there was like an initial prototype put together. But like even before that, we were trying to solve this other problem, which is too close for too long. And then we were looking at data sources. So can we use cold data records from cell towers? Can we use social media information? Can we use ad identifier from any of the ad platforms? Can we pull that data? Can we get people to use QR codes and check in like into different places? So we kind of scanned and looked at lots of it. Everybody's got a phone, so what capabilities does a phone have? How do we use that? And that kind of went on, and that stayed. That they were parallel streams that were running. So there was kind of the core piece, and we'd settled on, after meeting the NHS guys and after Trace Together was released in Singapore, it seemed like the sensible way to approach this was to look at it from, well, what's the minimum we can do? Because I guess privacy and data protection came in quite early. So if you look at GPS and capturing everybody's physical their location every couple of minutes, that's pretty invasive. So then you're looking, well, is there a different way of doing it? Okay, well, if we go with proximity based on Bluetooth, then it's a different way of doing that. So we were trying to trade off these constraints that were on us, and also, I guess, trying to figure out, if you want mass adoption, what's going to scare people, what's not going to scare people. So how we ended up on it was through, I guess, a lot of very small incremental decisions made at pace. And that's the key bit to it. And there was no time. So I think a lot of the decisions we made, I was going through and we reversed a ton of them. So we were going down a path, and then we got to a point, it wasn't working right. We come back and start again, move down a different path. So if you remember back to calling the beacons and core Bluetooth, that was like we were going down this road, we got it working, and then we discovered, oh, it's limited. We can't do this, and you move on. But there were decisions that usually in the normal course of a large complex project could be weeks, and we'll do an evaluation. It was like, well, we need to make a call now and pick. So it moved from like weeks to days to hours in some cases. So I think that side of it, and we definitely adhere to Mike Ryan's hypothesis about it.
Yeah, and I mean, I love seeing that. I just love seeing that speed. Just then moving on to, and for people who don't know, the COVID Green app is the open sourcing of the HSE app and donated to the Linux Foundation Public Health. I was going to say that the wrong way around. Is COVID Green the first open source project the HSE has been involved in?
Yes is the answer. It was the only one I know about. So the HSE is like 157,000 people.
Oh,
so guaranteed somewhere somebody has contributed into an open source project somehow, right?
Yes.
But in terms of something like this and at this scale, and the original driver for the open source piece was around transparency, because there was a huge demand to say, tell us how this works. So open sourcing the code. And I think the initial conversations in the HSE were, okay, so we'll just make it available. And some of the questions that I got in were like, it's for the audience that you have, like, it'll be hilarious. Can you send me the code, please? And some, like the questioner was asking, in their head, they had a Word document in their head that I was going to send them a Word document with the code. I was like, okay. So there was some very funny moments where there was a complete mismatch of like, how are we going to publish it? We just throw it up on the website. And I was like, hang on a second. So I got to set up the first GitHub organization for the HSE. So HSE Ireland was first into GitHub, and that was the first home for the code when we initially published it. That was 2 to 3 weeks before we launched. And then the Linux Foundation Public Health had kicked off, and it seemed a sensible approach because it was published for transparency reasons, but in terms of running an open source project, I mean, you guys have been involved in lots of them. So you know what's involved in that. It takes an investment. And the HSE is a health delivery organization, like it's responsible for delivering healthcare for Ireland, not necessarily responsible for delivering open source software projects or doing things like that. So pushing it into the Linux Foundation with the infrastructure behind that and the support and the community building around that. And obviously like for others to pick it up and use it, it gives it a better, like it gives it more access. It gives it more credibility as well in terms of where it's coming from, its provenance and how it can work. And the fact that that organization is there. And then you guys obviously as well are deeply involved in this, not just in Ireland now.
And Colin, you know, to what Gar is saying there, you've got this COVID Green here. You have what you would consider to be, I think, most people consider to be very traditional organizations like public health authorities and so on. And are you now seeing that it's a pull? You're not having to push open source on people. They're you know, in all of these American ones we're doing, it's becoming a demand that everything has to be open source.
Yeah, because as Gareth kind of mentioned, right, you know, the whole privacy is core to all the concerns across countries. So they all want to have that element of open source so people can see the code, they can see how it works. There's nothing hidden. And obviously it was a way for them as well to accelerate getting an app in place, right? If you're starting from scratch, you're going back to square one, you're solving all the same problems we've already solved. So if you can take an existing code base and then just tailor it to your own specific needs, like you mentioned, a lot of the apps are quite different in terms of how they look and feel. So, you know, we're allowing that level of customization, but you're still building on what has already been put in place, that's been tried and tested. You know, it works, it's already got those kind of privacy and security principles in place. So it covers all those things, and it just makes it a much safer bet to go with something like that, as opposed to, you know, let's go back and build our own, do it privately. And then you'll probably end up having to go back to that whole open sourcing it anyway for transparency reasons and privacy reasons. So it just makes sense to use something like Code Green as your starting point.
Yeah, and I suppose a general question for you all, and you know, these are certain personal opinions, and I'm you know, nobody's speaking on behalf of anybody else, but do you think this is going to be a model for, and I'm not going to say future pandemics, I'm not going to use that phrase.
I don't think this matter.
Future kind of public health things, future governmental activities where rather than everyone being in their own silos, in their own countries or in their own states, we suddenly have this sharing thing much more prevalent.
So let me have a crack at that one first, because I think there's always been sharing between public health authorities. So if you look between UK, Ireland, Northern Ireland, like we've always shared stuff. So there's been this ongoing piece, but it's not, I guess it's not done from an open sourcing perspective, and it's not done with that philosophy at its heart. It was just a sharing between parties. So, and that's an ongoing thing. I think the model that open source brings and the ability to bring and galvanize communities around these things to build it, I think that's an interesting move that can, like, I think that's going to be an interesting one as we kind of explore this further. And I'm very curious to see how we can, what else we can do with this. And the Linux Foundation public health piece, there are other problems worth solving. And if we're all suffering from the same problem and we can build, and it's kind of like, and if you look at it from the ground up with this, you've got Google and Apple exposure notification system as a piece of public health infrastructure. And then people are building on top of it to solve specific problems. And if we all have the same problem, then it's obviously, it would seem obvious that we can work together. I think one of the other interesting things that's happened is because each country was trying, like, I don't think there's ever been a project where you had teams all over the world all trying to solve the same problem at the same time, and more or less coalescing on the same way. And then obviously with Apple and Google coming in to support that as well. So we're trying to do something that really hasn't been done, and people are trying to figure out different ways of doing it. So it's I guess in any innovation thing, trying to keep as many avenues open. And the result of that has been a lot of collaboration across. So like, I think between myself and Colm anyway, we probably know anybody involved in a contact tracing app anywhere in the world at this point. And it's not bragging, but it's just, there's an active participation piece where we're like, people are looking for other people to, like, can you tell us how you did it? Can you tell us what you did? And there's a sharing there and a willingness to do it. I think the other thing that's come out of this as well is a reorientation around what time means. The fact that we can do something. So it took us 100 days from start to finish, and then we had to wait 10 days for a new government to come in. But it was 100 days from when we started to when we finished, right? And to do something like this that's fully integrated into the testing and tracing piece behind it. That's the bit. It's not a standalone. If this is a standalone thing, but this is integrated in, and not just at a technology level, it's integrated into the process, it's integrated into the communications, it's integrated into every aspect of the public health response. So which is quite, if anybody was to ask you, could this be done in 3 months, right, or 3 and a bit months, you'd be laughed out of the room, like, quite honestly. But given the situation, I think it has made people reconsider what's possible in short time frames if you've got the right skills, the right tech, the right people to throw at it. So, yeah.
And actually that I sort of, that leads on to, there's two related questions. I suppose one is sort of complexity and the other one is scale. And just on the complexity piece, so, you know, the HSE and HSENI did the first, you know, world's first interoperable system. Obviously, we had to, given the situation in Ireland. And now in the US, you have this APHL organization who are going to facilitate the same thing. I'm just wondering, when I talked at the start, or asked at the start, about all these different groups of people that you had to deal with to get the Irish app built. Colin and Kevin, does the complexity of having, whether it's multiple US states and multiple countries now, now you're even dealing with more people and more stakeholders, and how many hours in the day are you actually working right now?
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, go ahead, Colin.
You go.
Sorry, yeah, no, from a design point of view, I think it's we're all learning from each other, like, and it's not like, because it's public health, it's not like we're in competition. There's not, it's not like we're doing a banking app that's competing with 6 other banks. It's the Irish app is not going to be used in New Jersey. So we're learning from the other projects, and they're having their own testing and their own usability testing, and it's feeding back, and we can transfer that across teams. And if something has been identified elsewhere, we can feed it back into the Irish app, and vice versa. So design wise, yeah, like it's tough, it's busy, but it's excellent. We're learning a lot, and every app is benefiting from the scaling. So yeah, I think it's been brilliant.
We've seen that recently as well, Kevin, because even some of the stuff, the new features we're adding in, have been requested somewhere else. So we're getting the benefit from a lot of stuff that other people are thinking about. Because we became obsessed with getting it live and then running it, and then as other people are looking at it, they're building on top of what we've done. So I think that's
like the stats released today, for Ireland, the linear chart works for all time, whereas a smaller jurisdiction, a bar chart might work. So we're sharing information and where needed, learning from each other. So it's excellent. Yeah,
as a punter, kind of just say, I'm loving those stats, so just keep hitting us with those stats.
There's more coming. I guess it's an interesting thing, Connor, because like all of the questions, so typically what would happen is questions come in from as queries, FOIs or press queries coming in about tell us the numbers. And I think we've made a conscious decision that anything that's going to be repeatedly asked, we're just pushing it into the app so people can answer their own questions. Because if people are interested, they're interested. So, and it drives up the transparency piece of this as well. So that's kind of become nearly a design principle as part of it, that if this is going to be transparent, then let it be transparent. So if the numbers are interesting, let's feed people the numbers. So
it's I just honestly, as I said, and the number of people I talk to who just, that's why they're going. They're obviously going in to check in because they're, it's my duty to check in, but they're also, they love seeing the data. And actually, just speaking about design, Kevin, I know you've worked on sites and apps that have had many millions of users before you worked on this. Does that scale of user base, where the concept of personas might be quite difficult, does that affect how you design, where it's every man, every woman, or does it not actually affect things?
It does. Like, it goes back to kind of what I was mentioning at the start. You don't want to be too fancy. I was at a talk in December, and I talked about a designer trying to get her mother to use Revolut, and it was the talk was like a 3-month process of WhatsApp text and how do I do that. So it's a lovely app, nice UI, nice interactions, but it wouldn't have worked for something at this scale and for the audience. And then there's global patterns. We're looking at language is really important, so you want to make sure that different languages can adjust into the content of the app, and that just different design decisions around that are really important. You want it to be as accessible as possible, so we're looking at kind of screen readers and that. So it's definitely a different approach when you're looking at scale, from all aspects really, and then speed of the app. You don't want it, Kevin. To which
I left out the NCBI as one of the groups who was involved. NCBI helped us on the accessibility front and did a lot of testing with us and feedback, and that was incredibly valuable. So it was something that we haven't forgotten, but it's making sure that I guess it's getting people who understand what the problems are to test and see if this is solving their problem. particularly for people with sight impairment, it was that was a major one for us to get through.
Oh, that's I hadn't realized that. That's actually really interesting to know. And just to move slightly sideways, one group of people, and I'm sure if any of them are on the call who don't get mentioned very often, and we'll talk about them now, are the DevOps people and the people who build backends. And you know, it's sort of people only think about them when stuff isn't working, and it's when everything's working you don't realize what's gone into things. So you know, on launch, on the Irish launch, I'm there watching the DevOps Slack channel, and it's crickets, and we're watching the numbers like go through the roof, and you can't believe how fast this thing is scaling. And like the DevOps guys are, you know, not quite drinking pina coladas and going, yeah, told you, it's all working. But Colin, are there, presumably we have technical people on the audience today, but are there any specific aspects of how the thing was constructed, particularly on the back end, that made it so that it was no big deal that 1 million people signed up in the space of a couple of days?
Yeah, I suppose there's a couple of key things. We are leveraging AWS as the cloud infrastructure on the back end, and we're using a lot of their managed services, which are kind of, you know, they're built to scale, and they've been tried and tested across lots of different applications and organizations at this stage. But that doesn't mean like it kind of, you know, you get it for free out of the box and everything will just magically work. You know, the DevOps team were very busy before we went live. We went through multiple rounds of actual performance testing. So as part of performance testing, we were testing it on the basis that 1 million people would come onto the app within an hour. So, you know, we were testing way above what we actually expected to get. But even when we went live, there's still that fear factor of what if it goes wrong? What if something breaks? What if we forgot something? You know, that was, because you can be so involved in these things, you're so into the detail that sometimes you can overlook something quite obvious. And then it goes live and it hits you. But it didn't happen, thankfully. And it was, I mean, there was no issues on the back end. The guys did a great job. Everything was stable, and it has been since it went live. You know, there's been no infrastructure issues. It takes along, it does what it's supposed to do, and, you know, nobody's aware of it, which is kind of what you want.
Yeah, and you know, I was smiling to myself watching all of this, because I thought about the number of startups, you know, and many of us have been involved in them, where you set yourself up for your launch and you're going to have 1 million users and nothing happens because nobody signs up. And this is almost, you know, this is the opposite. It's like, well, you know, hopefully we'll get some users, and just the numbers went through the roof. So it was fantastic to see. So I'm gonna let us actually. I've been very bad. I haven't actually been checking the Q&A. I will check the Q&A in a minute, I swear. So we're going to head towards Q&A in a few minutes. So if people do want to ask questions, just pop them in the Q&A box down there on the bottom.
I'm still laughing at the DevOps engineer question, Connor, because I actually thought NearForm was just Connor and Kevin for a long time. Colin and Kevin. I think myself and Colin and Kevin have had more hours of face-to-face communications over the past months, and Antoine as well. Kevin had another thing happen. He had another project he was working on in the middle of it.
Yeah, I had my own deadline. Yeah, new arrival at the end of April. So.
we were talking about that before we started. Yeah. So I suppose one thing as we kind of head towards the end of this, and I know it's a very high level question, but I'd still be interested in it. And I think others would, particularly people working in public health authorities worldwide. So, like, if you had one thing, and each of you, you know, answer separately, if you had kind of one recommendation to say to a country or a state within a country, you know, one thing they should focus on more than anything else to ensure success. And I think because we all want these things to be successful because they help. You know, what would that recommendation be from the point of view of the world you happen to, you know, you live in?
So if let me try that one first. I think overall, so if I look at one of the reasons that this worked was we had a cross-governmental team. So on the HSE side of it, so every morning I had so before this NearForm stand-up, I had a stand-up while they were all sitting down with so the CIO and the HSE, the government CIO, Barry Lowry. So Fran Thompson and the HSE, Barry Lowry, with the head of digital for government, with the head of innovation for Garda. We had the assistant sec gen for health research and health informatics from the Department of Health. We had public health people, we had epidemiology people. So we had like this 11-person team, which met pretty much every day for the 100 days, bar the odd weekend we got off. There wasn't, I forgot what a weekend was. The one thing that gave you was that you had sufficient breadth, because these things are, they become highly politicized. It becomes highly, like it was very highly charged in the media. I think we made the newspapers, the front page of the Sunday newspapers, like 4 weekends in a row. And a lot of the stories are negative stories going on. So it's an easy one. It becomes an easy target. So if you're a public health authority and you're in any way disconnected from I guess the core response to COVID-19, I think you're on a hiding to nothing, because it's a difficult thing to get over the line. You're going to have so many obstacles and every country has gone through the same thing. So you get over civil liberties, you get over the privacy piece, you get over all of it. Regardless if we've done the work, you've got to do it in your country or your state in order for this to work. So I think having that right team at the start with a breadth of both experience and I guess just the breadth across government, I think that made a huge difference, because it did feel like it was an overall government response as opposed to a HSE project. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, it is about, like as Gareth mentioned, it's about having that right team. And we've kind of seen this kind of working with multiple governments now in states that are doing these projects. You need the people on projects that are willing to make decisions and are willing to kind of embrace the chaos aspect of this, right? Because there is no particular roadmap that you just follow. Like, here's the blueprint, just follow X, Y, Z, and you're done. I mean, it's a bit more understood now, but as Gareth said, every government has to go through their own cycle. They all have to go through the same steps, get the same approvals. So if you don't have people driving it that are willing to make decisions and move quickly, because there is time pressure on all these projects, it's very difficult to see then how you can actually be successful.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think during the project, just the buy-in from everyone, you weren't left wanting. There was, decisions made and people got back to you, like whether it was Fidelma and Sarah organizing usability testing or Aving on content. It was just at a pace that I've never seen before. It was, you'd ask for something at 9 a.m. and you might expect it the next day typically, and you'd have it by 11. It was just that type of reaction and feedback. So yeah, I think for other countries, just, the right team, the right people, and the buy-in behind it.
Excellent, thanks. And there's just a couple of small questions there. So it's one of them, and again, I think this is more for the technical people in the audience. What tech was used to build the mobile app in very kind of summary sense?
Yeah, at a very high level, we were using React Native on the front end, and primarily just means that we got both iOS and Android out of a single code base, so we didn't have to build it twice. Backend, mentioned some of the AWS, we're using AWS, we use Node.js as the backend REST API, and then various managed services through AWS to host and deploy everything.
Very cool. Very, very cool. I'm not going to ask anybody to answer the other question, but I will say what it is, which is what are the next countries and states to go live that haven't been announced yet, but we're not going to answer that other than to say stay posted. I think we're going to have some announcements. There might be an announcement next week, and there's probably a lot coming the week after. But yeah, stay posted on that, because there's still a lot of excitement happening here. I know you guys have several of you have hard stops. Any final comments from me? Anything you want to say to people or anything like that?
I guess for me, a big thank you to the guys, because I think I put them through torture for a long time. That's what it felt like. Even this week again, we had a release yesterday, and I think I think Colin and I were looking at each other going, this feels like May again. It's roll back. Neither of us are getting any younger, and there's not much hair between any of us.
Oh, well, yeah, that is very true.
So a big thank you to all the team, well, to the NearForm guys anyway, but to the other teams who were involved, actually everybody else, because I mean, it was a major effort, and it wasn't like, I mean, it's not like you're paying people to do stuff. This is like people wanting to do things, and like people going the extra mile. I don't think you can really, you can't really add the stuff that happened. You couldn't ask people to do it, to make the sacrifices, because people, like, you weren't seeing your family, you weren't seing your kids. My kids thought I was on a call like 100% of the time, as they got to know Colin Hart's voice. My wife knows everybody by name at this point, just by their voices. So I think that kind of commitment is, I mean, we've kind of come to expect it and probably take it for granted, but it shouldn't go unnoticed as well, because there's a huge effort there.
I mean, that worked both ways. You kind of expect, like, working with a government, you know, it's going to move slowly, it's going to be difficult. But like as a client to work with, you know, it was everything you would want out of a client. You know, decisive, moving quickly, getting decisions, being responsive. So, you know, I think, as Gareth said, it's everybody delivered together on this.
Super. That's fantastic.
Yeah, no, it was a privilege to work on. As a designer, you know, like you said, early March, you know, you just felt helpless in this whole situation, and then an opportunity. You know, like next year, like I'll be working on cool stuff at NearForm, but you know, this is a kind of a one-off, and just brilliant to be involved in.
I hope so, Kevin.
Yeah. Okay, on that positive note, I'd like to thank you all. I found this very educational. I hope everybody on the webinar did, and hopefully we'll be doing another one again soon. Thanks all.
Cheers, Connor.
Thanks everyone. Thanks, Connor.
Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye everyone.